The train whistle pierced the heavy summer air as it pulled into Cottonwood Station, Arizona territory. Josephine Reed stood on the platform, clutching a battered carpetbag containing every possession she owned in the world, her letter of agreement, tucked inside her bodice like a talisman. She had traveled over 2,000 miles on borrowed money and fragile hope, only to discover that some men measure a woman's worth in dollars rather than character. But fate has curious ways of leading the desperate to unexpected havens, and sometimes the cruelest rejection can open the door to the most extraordinary second chance. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The locomotive released a final hiss of steam as it came to rest at the small wooden platform marking the last stop on Josephine's grueling 3-day journey from St. Louis. Her simple navy dress, once her Sunday best, now bore the wrinkles and dust of travel despite her careful attempts to appear presentable. She had managed her dark chestnut hair into a neat bun beneath her modest hat, though several tendrils had escaped in the Arizona heat, clinging to her neck where perspiration gathered. Josephine took a deep breath, steadying herself against the sudden wave of dizziness that threatened her composure. The journey had been longer than expected, delays caused by track repairs forcing passengers to spend an extra night in a crowded way station where she'd been too anxious to sleep. Now, standing on the edge of her new life, exhaustion battled. With nervous anticipation, Cottonwood Station, end of the line for Arizona Central, the conductor called, moving down the platform with practiced efficiency. Transfers for Phoenix depart tomorrow morning. Passengers disembarked around her, a cattle dealer returning from business in Chicago, a family relocating from the east with 3 boisterous children, 2 missionaries heading to Apache territory. Josephine remained still, scanning the faces that had gathered to meet the train, searching for the man who would be her husband, Samuel Blackwood. The name had become so familiar these past months, written at the bottom of increasingly warm letters. A cattle rancher of 42 years, established and respected in the territory, seeking a wife of good moral character and practical nature. His advertisement in the Matrimonial Times had seemed like divine providence when Josephine found herself suddenly unemployed after the Boston textile mill, where she had worked, closed abruptly. "Are you looking for someone, miss?" A young boy of perhaps 10 approached, a stick of licorice clutched in his grimy hand. "Train don't come through, but 3 times a week," Josephine smiled, grateful for the distraction from her anxious thoughts. "Yes, I'm meeting Mr. Samuel Blackwood. Do you know him?" The boy's eyes widened. "Mr. Blackwood from Diamond B Ranch?" "Yes, ma'am. Everybody knows Mr. Blackwood, biggest ranch in the county." He pointed toward the center of town. "He's probably at Ferguson's Mercantile. Most folks stop there on Fridays." "Thank you," Josephine replied, picking up her carpetbag. "It's in the center of town, then?" "Yes'm. Just follow the main street. Can't miss it." The boy studied her with unabashed curiosity. "Are you kin to Mr. Blackwood?" A flush crept up Josephine's cheeks. "Not yet. She hesitated, uncertain how to explain her situation to a child. "I'm expected by Mr. Blackwood." The boy nodded with the easy acceptance of youth, then dashed off as another child called his name. Josephine squared her shoulders and began walking toward town, her carpetbag surprisingly light for containing her entire world. Cottonwood Station belied its grand name. A single dusty street lined with wooden buildings, most still bearing the raw look of frontier construction, a general store, a saloon, a small whitewashed church, the sheriff's office, and a hotel that had seen better days. Men in dusty clothes moved about their business, some pausing to watch the newcomer with undisguised interest. Josephine felt their eyes upon her, but kept her gaze straight ahead. She had endured enough scrutiny in her 28 years to know that looking vulnerable only invited unwanted attention. Ferguson's Mercantile stood in the center of town, a two-story building with a wide porch where several men sat in rough, wooden chairs. Josephine paused outside, smoothing her dress and taking a steadying breath. This was the moment she had traveled so far to reach. This was the beginning of her new life. Inside, the store was cool and dim after the harsh sunlight. The scent of coffee, leather, and dried goods filled the air. Several customers browsed the shelves, while the proprietor, a balding man with spectacles, tallied figures in a ledger. Josephine's attention, however, was immediately drawn to a tall figure examining a display of ammunition. Samuel Blackwood matched the brief description from his letters. Tall, with broad shoulders, a well-trimmed beard now streaked with grey, and an air of quiet authority. His clothes, while not fancy, were of good quality, the leather of his boots well oiled but marked from use. He looked up as the door closed behind her, his expression initially neutral, then questioning as Josephine walked directly toward him. "Mr. Blackwood," she said, her voice remarkably steady despite the riot of butterflies in her stomach. "Yes?" His gaze was direct, searching her face with no hint of recognition. "I'm Josephine Reed, from Boston." She waited for understanding to dawn. It came slowly, his brow furrowing before his eyes widened slightly. "Miss Reed." He glanced around the store where several people had paused to observe their exchange. "You're here?" "Yes." She smiled tentatively. "I received your letter confirming our arrangement. I came as soon as I could secure passage." Something flickered across his face. Surprise, certainly, but also something else Josephine couldn't quite name. Discomfort, perhaps, or disappointment. "Miss Reed, He cleared his throat, glancing around again as if searching for a way out of their conversation. "I wasn't expecting you so soon. Your last letter said any time after June would be suitable," she reminded him gently. "It's mid-July now." "Yes, of course." He nodded, still seeming disoriented by her presence. His eyes traveled over her, taking in her plain dress, her worn carpet bag, and the clear lack of any other belongings. His expression hardened slightly. "Where is the rest of your luggage?" Heat crept into Josephine's cheeks. "This is all I brought. I thought it best to travel light." Samuel's jaw tightened. His gaze returned to her face, assessing now rather than welcoming. "Perhaps we should speak somewhere more private." He led her across the street to a small cafe attached to the hotel. Inside, the dimly lit space was mostly empty, with only an older couple seated near the window. Samuel selected a table in the far corner and pulled out a chair for Josephine with stiff courtesy. Once seated, an uncomfortable silence settled between them. "Coffee?" Samuel finally asked. "Yes, please." Her mouth was dry with apprehension. He signaled to a waitress, ordered 2 coffees, then turned back to Josephine. His handsome face was guarded now, so different from the warmth she had imagined behind his written words. "Miss Reed," he began after the coffee arrived, "I believe there's been a misunderstanding." Josephine's heart sank. "What kind of misunderstanding, Mr. Blackwood?" He stirred his coffee slowly, not meeting her eyes. "In your letters, you described yourself as a woman of modest circumstances. I took that to mean—" He paused, searching for words. "You took it to mean I wasn't destitute," Josephine finished for him, her voice quiet but direct. His eyes snapped to hers, surprised by her frankness. "I have worked hard to establish my ranch, Miss Reed. It's beginning to prosper, but I need a wife who can bring something to the marriage. Some funds to expand our operations, perhaps, or at least a proper trousseau." "I see." Josephine's chest tightened, but she kept her composure. "I was honest about my circumstances, Mr. Blackwood. I told you I was a textile worker who lost her position. You didn't mention you were arriving with nothing but a carpet bag." His voice hardened. "A man in my position needs a wife who can help elevate his standing, not someone who will be another mouth to feed and another expense to bear." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us now. Back to the story. The words struck Josephine like physical blows. She had known coming west was a risk, but she hadn't expected such a cold assessment of her worth based solely on her material possessions. "I have skills, Mr. Blackwood. I can sew, keep accounts. Skills I can hire for less than the cost of supporting a wife," he cut in. "I'm sorry if this seems cruel, Miss Reed, but I must think practically. I need capital to expand my herd. The drought last summer set me back and—" He stopped himself, as if realizing he was revealing too much about his own financial concerns. Outside the window, a group of men passed by, laughing loudly. Two of them glanced inside, their eyes landing on Josephine and Samuel, curiosity evident. One nudged the other and whispered something that made them both chuckle. Word traveled fast in small towns, Josephine realized. They knew who she must be. "I've already paid for the announcement in the church bulletin," Samuel continued, lowering his voice. "Folks have been congratulating me, but under the circumstances, you wish to rescind your proposal," Josephine stated flatly. "I think it would be best." He at least had the decency to look uncomfortable. "I can provide you with enough money for a return ticket to Boston." Josephine's fingernails dug into her palms beneath the table. "And what would I return to, Mr. Blackwood?" "I gave up my room. I sold what little furniture I owned." A flicker of guilt crossed his face, quickly replaced by resolve. "That's not my concern, Miss Reed. I made no promises about accepting you regardless of your circumstances." "No, you merely implied it with every letter." She could feel the stares of the other patrons now, the weight of their judgment and curiosity. "What will you tell them?" She nodded toward the window where more townspeople were passing by, some slowing to peek inside. Samuel shifted uncomfortably. "The truth, that there was a misunderstanding." "The truth," Josephine repeated, her voice barely audible. "That I'm too poor to be worthy of becoming Mrs. Blackwood?" His jaw clenched. "I have a reputation in this town, Miss Reed. A standing. I can't appear foolish." "No," she agreed, a strange calm settling over her despite the humiliation burning in her chest. "Better that I appear foolish instead. The desperate woman who came west with nothing but a carpet-bag and misplaced hope." Samuel opened his mouth to reply, but the cafe door swung open and a boisterous group of men entered, ranch hands by the look of them, dust-covered and loud after a day's work. One of them spotted Samuel and raised a hand in greeting. "Blackwood, there you are." The man approached their table, his smile fading as he sensed the tension. His eyes moved to Josephine, curious. "This the mail-order bride we've been hearing about?" Josephine stiffened at the crude description. Samuel stood abruptly. "Not now, Collins," but Collins was already extending a hand to Josephine. "Welcome to Cottonwood Station, ma'am. You sure traveled a long way. When's the wedding?" The cafe had gone quiet, all eyes on their table. Josephine saw the panic in Samuel's face, his desperation to avoid public embarrassment. "There won't be a wedding," Samuel said tightly. "There's been a misunderstanding." Collins looked between them, confusion evident on his weathered face. "Misunderstanding? What kind of—" "The kind where I expected a bride with means, not a beggar with a carpet-bag," Samuel snapped, his composure finally breaking under the pressure of public scrutiny. A collective gasp rippled through the cafe. Josephine sat frozen, the words echoing in her ears. She had endured much in her 28 years, the loss of her parents to influenza, poverty, the countless small humiliations that came with being a woman alone in the world. But never had she felt so utterly exposed, so completely stripped of dignity. With mechanical precision, she stood, smoothed her dress, and picked up her carpet-bag. "Thank you for the coffee, Mr. Blackwood," she said, her voice surprisingly steady. "I won't trouble you further." Without waiting for a response, she walked out of the cafe, past the staring faces, into the harsh sunlight of an Arizona afternoon. Behind her, she could hear the buzz of conversation erupting, Samuel's voice rising defensively. Josephine didn't look back. She walked down the main street, her mind racing. She had exactly 37 cents in her pocket. Not enough for a room, not enough for a meal, certainly not enough for a ticket back east. The sun beat down mercilessly, as if to emphasize the bleakness of her situation. At the edge of town, where the buildings gave way to open country, she stopped. Miles of grassland stretched before her, dotted with distant cattle and the occasional homestead. This was the West she had dreamed of, the open possibility of it. Now just another cruel reminder of all she couldn't have. A wagon rattled past, the driver tipping his hat politely before continuing on. Josephine watched it disappear down the dusty road, then turned and began walking again, this time away from town. She had no destination in mind, only the blind need to escape the whispers and stares. Thunder rumbled in the distance, and Josephine looked up to see storm clouds gathering on the western horizon, moving steadily closer. Perfect, she thought with grim humor. A fitting end to a disastrous day. She should find shelter, she knew, but where? Return to Cottonwood Station and face the humiliation again, sleep beneath a cactus and hope the storm passes quickly. As the first heavy drops of rain began to fall, splashing into the dry earth and dotting her navy dress with darker patches, Josephine realized that for the first time in her life, she had no plan, no next step to take. She had gambled everything on Samuel Blackwood's promise of a future, and she had lost. The rain came harder now, soaking through her thin dress. Josephine clutched her carpetbag and stood, scanning the landscape for any sign of shelter. Through the curtain of rain, she noticed what appeared to be a barn or outbuilding on a distant hillside. With no better option available, she began walking toward it, each step a battle against the increasingly muddy ground. The storm intensified, wind driving the rain sideways. Josephine's dress clung to her like a second skin, her hair plastered. To her face, lightning cracked overhead, followed almost immediately by a deafening clap of thunder. She quickened her pace, slipping and stumbling up the hillside. As she drew closer, she could see that the structure was indeed a barn, old but solid-looking, attached to a modest ranch house set back among a stand of mesquite trees. Smoke rose from the chimney despite the summer season. Someone was home, cooking perhaps. Josephine hesitated at the edge of the property. She had no desire to face more rejection today, but the storm left her little choice. She would ask only for temporary shelter in the barn until the worst of the weather passed. Surely no one would be heartless enough to refuse such a basic kindness. With that thin hope clutched tight, she made her way to the barn door, each step taking her further from the life she had planned and closer to whatever waited ahead. Its shelter from the storm, or yet another door closed in her face. The rain hammered against Josephine's shoulders as she approached the weathered barn door. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the structure in harsh white light before plunging it back into the grey shroud of the storm. Her fingers, numb with cold, fumbled with the wooden latch. The door finally gave way with a groan of protest, and she stumbled inside. The sudden absence of rain was disorienting. Josephine stood dripping on the packed dirt floor, her eyes slowly adjusting to the dimness. The air smelled of hay, leather, and animals, earthy and strangely comforting after her ordeal. "Hello?" she called softly, not wanting to startle anyone who might be inside. Only the shifting of horses in their stalls and the drumming of rain on the roof answered her. Josephine moved deeper into the barn, her sodden boots leaving dark impressions. On the ground, the structure was larger than it had appeared from outside, with 6 stalls on each side and a loft above. 4 of the stalls contained horses, fine-looking animals that watched her with mild curiosity. This was no modest homestead. She realized the quality of the barn alone spoke of prosperity. But unlike Samuel Blackwood's carefully manicured ranch house, which she had glimpsed from the train on her arrival, this place had a lived-in quality. Tools hung in practical, accessible places rather than for show. Harnesses were well-oiled, but bore the marks of regular use. Josephine sank onto a bale of hay, her legs finally giving out. The events of the day crashed over her in waves, the journey's end, Samuel's cold dismissal, the public humiliation, the long walk to nowhere, and now this desperate shelter-seeking. She had never felt so utterly alone. A sob rose in her throat, but she forced it back. Crying wouldn't improve her situation. She needed to think, to plan. But the gentle rhythm of the rain and the warm dimness of the barn conspired against her determination. Exhaustion tugged at her limbs and clouded her mind. Just a moment's rest, she whispered to herself, laying her head against her carpetbag. Then I'll figure out what to do next. Her eyes drifted closed as the storm continued its assault outside. "Ma'am, ma'am, can you hear me?" The voice penetrated. Josephine's fog of sleep deep and concerned. She jerked awake, momentarily disoriented by the unfamiliar surroundings. A man stood over her, his features shadowed by the lantern he held aloft. "I'm sorry," she stammered, scrambling to sit upright. "I didn't mean to trespass. The storm—" "Easy now," the man said, setting the lantern on a nearby post. "No one's accusing you of anything." As he moved into the light, Josephine could see him clearly for the first time. He was tall, with broad shoulders that strained against a simple work shirt rolled to the elbows. His face was tanned from long days outdoors, with lines at the corners, of eyes that suggested both laughter and hardship. A short beard, neatly trimmed, covered a strong jaw. He looked to be in his mid-40s, with dark hair just beginning to silver at the temples. "Gabriel Thornton," he introduced himself, not offering his hand, but instead keeping a respectful distance. "This is my ranch you've wandered onto." "Josephine Reed," she replied, smoothing her dress in a futile attempt at dignity. The fabric was still damp and hopelessly wrinkled. "I truly am sorry for the intrusion, Mr. Thornton. I was caught in the storm with nowhere to go." His eyes, a surprising shade of amber, assessed her with frank curiosity. "You're a long way from anywhere. To be out walking in this weather, Miss Reed." There was no accusation in his tone, just a simple observation that nevertheless demanded an explanation. Josephine hesitated. The truth was humiliating, but she was beyond pride at this point. "I arrived in Cottonwood Station today. My arrangements." He fell through. "I found myself without accommodation or means to secure any." Understanding dawned in Gabriel's expression. "You're the woman Blackwood sent for." Heat rushed to Josephine's cheeks. "Word travels fast. Small towns," he said with a slight shrug. "Not much stays secret for long." Josephine reached for her carpetbag, moving to stand. "I'll be on my way, Mr. Thornton. The rain has let up, and I've imposed enough." "Where exactly do you plan to go at this hour, Miss Reed?" he asked, making no move to stop her but clearly skeptical of her plan. "It's nearly midnight. Cottonwood Station's 4 miles back, and there's nothing else for 20 miles in any direction." Josephine faltered. She hadn't realized she'd slept so long. The storm had indeed quieted to a gentle patter, but the darkness outside the barn door was absolute. I don't know," she admitted, the simple truth of those 3 words devastating in their finality. Gabriel studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he sighed, a sound that seemed to come from deep within him. "My house isn't much," he said finally, "but there's a spare room with a bed, and I've got stew on the stove. You look like you could use both." Josephine stared at him, suspicion warring with desperate need. "Why would you help me?" "Because it's raining. You're stranded. And I'm not in the habit of sending people into the night with nowhere to go." He picked up the lantern. "It's just shelter and food, Miss Reed. Nothing more complicated than that." The simplicity of his answer, free from pity or ulterior motive, decided her. "Thank you, Mr. Thornton. I accept your hospitality." He nodded once, then turned toward the barn door. "Follow me. Watch your step. The yard turns to mud something. Awful after a storm." Outside, the world was draped in the hushed aftermath of rain. The clouds had broken in places, allowing glimpses of a star-studded sky. The air smelled clean and new, carrying the scent of wet earth and desert vegetation. The house stood approximately 50 yards from the barn, a substantial adobe structure with a covered porch wrapping around two sides. Light glowed from several windows, warm and inviting against the night. As they approached, Josephine could see herb gardens beneath the front windows, filled with what looked like medicinal plants rather than decorative blooms. Gabriel led her up the porch steps and held the door open. Josephine hesitated at the threshold, suddenly aware of how bedraggled she must appear and the impropriety of entering a bachelor's home at such an hour. But the alternative was unthinkable, and so she stepped inside. The interior was surprisingly comfortable. A large stone fireplace dominated one wall of the main room, a cooking pot suspended over the glowing embers. Bookshelves lined another wall, filled with volumes that appeared well read. The furniture was solid and practical, a sturdy table, with 4 chairs, a writing desk near a window, 2 armchairs positioned by the fire. Everything was clean and orderly, with none of the haphazard disarray one might expect in a bachelor's household. "You can warm yourself by the fire," Gabriel said, indicating one of the armchairs. "I'll find you something dry to wear." "You have women's clothing?" Josephine asked before she could stop herself. A shadow crossed his face. "My sister stayed with me for a time. She left some things behind." Before Josephine could respond, he disappeared down a hallway, returning moments later with a bundle of fabric. "These should fit well enough for tonight," he said, offering her the clothes. "A simple cotton nightgown and a flannel robe. The spare room is the second door on the right. There's a washstand with fresh water. Get changed, and I'll have some food ready when you return." Josephine accepted the garments, touched by the unexpected kindness. "Thank you, Mr. Thornton." The spare room was small, but meticulously clean, with a narrow bed covered in a patchwork quilt, a washstand, and a chest of drawers. A window looked out over the moonlit landscape. Josephine quickly washed the trail dust from her face and hands, then changed into the borrowed nightgown. It was slightly large, but blessedly dry. The flannel robe, faded from many washings, enveloped her in unexpected warmth. She hesitated, uncertain about rejoining her host in such informal attire, but the rumbling of her empty stomach decided the matter. With as much dignity as she could muster, she made her way back to the main room. Gabriel was at the fireplace ladling stew into bowls. He had removed his boots and outer shirt, standing now in trousers and a simple Henley that revealed forearms, accorded with muscle from years of ranch work. He glanced up as she entered. "Better?" he asked. Josephine nodded self-consciously, pulling the robe tighter. "Much, thank you." "Sit," he said, indicating the table where he'd already set places for 2. "The stew isn't fancy, but it's filling." Josephine took a seat, watching as he placed a steaming bowl before her, along with a thick slice of bread and a mug of coffee. The aroma of the food made her mouth water embarrassingly. She couldn't remember the last time she'd eaten. A dry biscuit on the train that morning, perhaps. Gabriel took the seat across from her, though he made no move to begin eating. After a moment of confusion, Josephine realized he was waiting for her to take the first bite. The simple courtesy brought a lump to her throat after a day of callous treatment. The stew was indeed simple: beef, potatoes, carrots, and herbs. But to Josephine's hunger-sharpened senses, it was ambrosia. She ate slowly, mindful of appearances even in her famished state, but it took considerable willpower not to wolf down the entire bowl. They ate in silence for a while, the only sounds the occasional pop from the fireplace and the soft clink of spoons against bowls. It wasn't an uncomfortable silence, which surprised Josephine after the tumultuous events of the day. This quiet moment with a stranger felt oddly peaceful. "May I ask what happened in town?" Gabriel finally said, breaking the silence. "I only heard fragments from Collins when he stopped by to deliver some fence wire." Josephine set down her spoon, her appetite suddenly diminished despite her hunger. "I'm sure you heard enough. I'd rather hear it from you," he said simply. She met his gaze across the table, searching for signs of morbid curiosity or judgment. She found neither, only patient attention. "I answered Mr. Blackwood's advertisement for a bride," she began, the words difficult to form. "We exchanged letters for 4 months. He seemed kind, thoughtful. He knew I was a textile worker who had lost my position. I was transparent about my circumstances." She took a sip of coffee, gathering her thoughts. "But when I arrived with only my carpetbag, it became clear he had expected someone with more substantial means, someone who could contribute financially to his ranch. And he rejected you publicly," Gabriel stated, rather than asked, his voice neutral. "Yes." The humiliation of the scene in the cafe burned fresh in her memory. In front of half the town, it seemed. Gabriel's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Blackwood always did put appearances above substance. The comment suggested a history between the two men, but Josephine didn't press. Her situation was precarious enough without involving herself in local feuds. "In any case," she continued, "I found myself with nowhere to go and very little money. I walked until the storm caught me, and your barn seemed the safest option." 4 miles in those shoes, Gabriel observed, glancing at her worn boots drying by the fire. "That couldn't have been easy," Josephine managed a wry smile. "I've endured worse." Something in her tone must have conveyed more than she intended, because Gabriel's expression softened with recognition, the understanding of someone who had also weathered life's harsher seasons. "What will you do now?" he asked after a moment. It was the question Josephine had been avoiding since walking out of that cafe, the question that loomed like a mountain before her, impossible to scale. "I don't know," she admitted, the words painful in their honesty. "I have 37 cents to my name. Not enough for a room, certainly not enough for a ticket back east, and there's nothing to return to anyway." She hadn't meant to reveal quite so much, but exhaustion had lowered her defenses. She straightened her shoulders, unwilling to appear as destitute as she felt. "I'll find work, I suppose. I'm a skilled seamstress. Perhaps someone in town needs—" "Not in Cottonwood Station," Gabriel interrupted, his tone matter-of-fact rather than unkind. "The only women's work to be had is at the saloon or taking in laundry for the miners, and after today you'll find few willing to hire you." "Because I was rejected?" Josephine asked, incredulous. "Because people take Blackwood's word as gospel." "Around here," Gabriel replied. "He's on the town council, has the ear of the mayor. If he says you're not good enough for him, folks will wonder why they should think differently." The unfairness of it stung. "I've done nothing wrong except be poor." "That's enough for some," Gabriel said with a grimace. "And scandal is the lifeblood of small towns." Josephine pushed her empty bowl away, the reality of her situation settling over her like a shroud. "Then I'll go elsewhere. Phoenix, perhaps, or with 37 cents and no references." Gabriel's voice remained gentle despite the bluntness of his words. "Miss Reed, I don't mean to be unkind, but I've lived out here long enough to know how quickly the West devours the unprepared." "What would you have me do then?" Josephine asked, a flash of anger finally breaking through her careful composure. "Beg on the streets? Sell myself? I survived Boston's factories and boarding houses. I'll survive this too." Instead of bristling at her tone, Gabriel seemed to approve of the spark of defiance. "I have no doubt you would," he said, "but there's a third option you haven't considered." Josephine regarded him warily. "And what might that be?" "I need help around the ranch," he said simply. "The house, the garden, the accounts. I've been managing alone since my sister left, but it's wearing me thin. I can offer you the spare room, meals, and a small wage until you decide what you want to do next." Josephine stared at him, searching for the trap in his offer. "You're proposing to hire me as what exactly?" "As a housekeeper, if you like, or a ranch hand, or both," he shrugged. "I'm not particular about titles, just results." "Why would you do this? You don't know me." "I know enough," he said. "I know you walked 4 miles in a storm rather than stay where you weren't wanted. I know you fell asleep in a strange barn rather than compromise your principles. And I know that Samuel Blackwood is a fool who values appearances over character." He rose and collected their empty bowls, carrying them to a wash basin near the kitchen area. "The offer stands for a week. You can rest, recover your strength, and consider your options. After that, if you want to leave, I'll drive you to Phoenix, myself, and give you enough to secure lodgings while you look for work." Josephine was speechless. After a day of cruelty and rejection, this unexpected kindness was almost harder to bear. "I don't accept charity, Mr. Thornton," she finally managed, her voice barely above a whisper. He turned to face her, his expression serious. "It's not charity. It's an exchange. Your work for room, board, and wages. Nothing more, nothing less." The fire crackled in the hearth, casting dancing shadows across the room. Outside, an owl called, its mournful cry punctuating the night's stillness. Josephine considered her options, which were, in truth, virtually non-existent. "1 week," she said at last, "to determine if the arrangement suits us both." Gabriel nodded, seemingly satisfied. "Agreed." He showed her back to the spare room, providing an extra blanket against the night's chill and a candle for light. "Sleep as late as you need," he said. "I'll be out checking the herd in the morning, but there's bread and preserves in the pantry for breakfast." As he turned to leave, Josephine called after him. "Mr. Thornton?" He paused in the doorway, looking back. "Thank you," she said quietly. "Not many would have done what you did tonight." A shadow of something, sadness perhaps, or memory, crossed his face. "Get some rest, Miss Reed. Tomorrow's soon enough to face the world again." With that, he closed the door softly, leaving Josephine alone with her thoughts. She sat on the edge of the bed, running her fingers over the patchwork quilt. 1 week, 7 days to decide her future, to determine if this unexpected haven was truly what it appeared to be. As she extinguished the candle and lay down, she found herself thinking not of Samuel Blackwood's cruel rejection, but of Gabriel. Thornton's amber eyes that had seen her not as a pauper to be dismissed or a woman to be exploited, but as a human being worthy of basic dignity. Outside, the last remnants of the storm passed, and the Arizona sky cleared to reveal a tapestry of stars. Josephine Reed, mail-order bride no longer, drifted into the first peaceful sleep she had known in months, uncertain of what tomorrow would bring, but for the moment at least, safe from the storm. Morning light filtered through the curtains when Josephine finally opened her eyes. For a moment, she stared at the unfamiliar ceiling, disoriented. Then the memories of the previous day crashed over her, the rejection, the storm, Gabriel Thornton's unexpected offer. She sat up slowly, taking in the spare room in daylight. What had seemed merely functional in the darkness now revealed subtle touches of care. A small vase of wildflowers on the dresser, a hand-carved wooden brush beside the wash basin, a quilt, that, upon closer inspection, showed extraordinary craftsmanship. Someone had taken great pains with this room, despite its simplicity. Josephine rose and went to the window. The view stole her breath. Rolling hills stretched toward distant mountains, their peaks shimmering in the morning heat. The land immediately. Surrounding the ranch house was a patchwork of gardens, corrals and grazing pastures, where cattle dotted the landscape like chessmen on a board. A stream wound its way through the property, bordered by cottonwoods and mesquites that swayed gently in the morning breeze. It was beautiful in a wild, untamed way, so different from Boston's crowded streets and smoke-stained buildings. A movement. It caught her eye. Gabriel, astride a chestnut horse, riding between pastures. Even from a distance, she could see the easy way he sat in the saddle, man and animal moving as one across the landscape. He stopped to speak with another rider, a ranch hand, presumably, pointing toward a far section of the property before continuing on his way. Josephine stepped back from the window, suddenly conscious of her borrowed nightclothes and disheveled appearance. She washed quickly at the basin, then surveyed her own clothing with dismay. Her navy dress, hung to dry overnight, was clean enough but hopelessly wrinkled and still bore the travel stains from her journey. The thought of appearing before Gabrielle looking so bedraggled filled her with unexpected embarrassment. A knock at the door interrupted her fretting. "Miss Reed," Gabriel's voice came through the wood. "I've left some things outside your door that might be useful. Take your time coming out." Josephine waited until his footsteps receded, then cracked the door open. On the floor sat a bundle tied with twine. She brought it inside and untied it with curious fingers. Inside, she found a dress of faded indigo cotton, simple but well made, a clean chemise and drawers, thick woolen stockings, and a pair of sturdy boots that looked nearly new. Beneath these lay a comb, a small pot of what appeared to be hand cream, and a bar of sage-scented soap. Josephine touched each item with wonder. The clothing was plain but practical, working clothes rather than finery, yet the thoughtfulness of including such necessities moved her deeply. She dressed quickly, finding that while the clothes were slightly large, they were not uncomfortably so. The boots fit surprisingly well. Looking in the small mirror above the washstand, she hardly recognized herself. The woman who stared back looked capable, practical, ready to face whatever the day might bring. When she finally emerged, she found the main room empty, but a coffee pot warming on the stove and a cloth-covered plate on the table with a note beside it. "Miss Reed, out checking the southern pasture. Help yourself to breakfast. Garden needs attention if you're feeling up to it. Tools in the shed behind the house. G. Thornton." The directness of the note made her smile. No pleasantries, no unnecessary words, much like the man himself. He had wasted no time putting their arrangement to the test. Josephine ate quickly, savoring the homemade bread and peach preserves. The coffee was strong and hot, exactly what she needed to clear the last cobwebs of sleep from her mind. 1 week, that was their agreement. 7 days to determine if this arrangement would work. But what exactly was this arrangement? Housekeeper, ranch hand, some combination of both? And what would happen when the week ended? Josephine pushed these questions aside for now. Better to focus on the immediate, proving her worth, earning her keep, and considering her options one day at a time. After breakfast, she washed her dishes and surveyed the house. It was clean but clearly maintained by someone who focused on function over comfort. The shelves needed dusting, the floor a thorough sweeping. The kitchen area was organized but showed evidence of bachelor living, mismatched plates, utensils tossed in a drawer rather than properly sorted. Josephine rolled up her sleeves and set to work. She found cleaning supplies in a pantry off the kitchen: lye soap, beeswax, vinegar, rags, and brushes. Starting with the main room, she cleaned methodically, taking care not to disturb the placement of Gabriel's possessions while removing months of accumulated dust. As she worked, she took note of the books on his shelves, volumes on animal husbandry and agriculture, but also history, poetry, and what appeared to be journals filled with handwritten notes. Not the library of an uneducated rancher, certainly. By mid-morning, she had swept and dusted the main room and kitchen area and was scrubbing the plank floor when a sound at the door made her look up. A woman stood in the doorway, middle-aged and sturdy, with iron-grey hair pulled into a severe bun and sharp eyes that took in Josephine's appearance in one sweeping glance. "So it's true," the woman said without preamble. "Thornton's taken in Blackwood's cast-off." Josephine rose slowly from her knees, cloth still in hand. "I beg your pardon?" The woman stepped inside uninvited, closing the door behind her. "News travels fast around these parts. Everyone's talking about how you showed up on Samuel Blackwood's doorstep with nothing but a carpet bag, got yourself rejected, and somehow ended up at the Thornton Ranch before sundown." She crossed her arms. That didn't take long. Heat flooded Josephine's face, partly from embarrassment, partly from anger at the insinuation. "I don't believe we've been introduced." "Harriet Sanchez. I do the washing for most of the ranches hereabouts, including this one." Her expression softened slightly. "Known Gabriel Thornton since he was a boy, which is why I'm here to warn you." "Mrs. Sanchez," Josephine interrupted, her voice calm despite her racing pulse. "Whatever you've heard is undoubtedly distorted. Mr. Thornton offered me temporary employment as his housekeeper after I was caught in yesterday's storm. It's a business arrangement, nothing more." Harriet's eyebrows rose. "Is that what he told you?" "It's what we agreed upon," Josephine replied, meeting the older woman's gaze steadily. "For 1 week, after which I'll likely continue to Phoenix." Harriet looked pointedly at the clothes Josephine wore. "Those are Isabella's things." Isabella, his sister. "Left 3 years ago after—" She stopped herself. "Not my place to say. Point is, Gabriel doesn't let just anyone wear her clothes." Josephine set down her cleaning rag, uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. "Mr. Thornton kindly lent me these until my own can be properly laundered." "I'd hardly call that inappropriate." Harriet studied her for a long moment, then sighed. "You're not what I expected." "And what did you expect, Mrs. Sanchez?" "Someone looking to take advantage." She gestured vaguely. "Pretty girl. Desperate circumstances. Wealthy bachelor. Wouldn't be the first time that story played out badly." Despite herself, Josephine felt a grudging respect for the woman's bluntness. "I assure you, I have no designs on Mr. Thornton or his property. As soon as I've earned enough for passage to Phoenix, I'll be on my way." Harriet's expression changed subtly, something like approval flickering in her eyes. "Well then, since you're here and cleaning anyway, I've brought Gabriel's washing." She indicated a basket by the door that Josephine hadn't noticed. "Where shall I put it?" The swift change in tone was disorienting, but Josephine recovered quickly. "I'll take care of it. Thank you for bringing it along." Harriet nodded and turned to leave, then paused. "One more thing. Gabriel prefers his shirts hung to dry, not folded wet. Says they wrinkle less that way." With that peculiar piece of advice, she departed, leaving Josephine alone with her thoughts once more. She returned to her cleaning with renewed vigor, as if scrubbing the floors could somehow erase the town's gossip. By the time Gabriel returned, the main living areas were spotless. His washing was hanging on the line outside, and Josephine had started preparing a stew for the evening meal, using ingredients she'd found in the root cellar. The sound of boots on the porch gave her just enough warning to straighten her apron and smooth her hair before Gabriel entered, bringing with him the scent of sun-warmed leather and sage. He paused in the doorway, his gaze taking in the transformed space. "You've been busy. I hope you don't mind that I took the initiative," Josephine said, suddenly uncertain. "Your note mentioned the garden, but I thought the house needed attention first. Mind? He removed his hat, hanging it on a peg by the door. This place hasn't been this clean since Isabella left. The casual mention of his sister reminded Josephine of Harriet's visit. Mrs. Sanchez came by with your washing. Something flickered across Gabriel's face. Irritation, perhaps, or resignation. Did she now? I'm sure she had plenty to say. She was informative, Josephine replied diplomatically. A rare smile tugged at the corner of Gabriel's mouth. I can imagine. Harriet fancies herself the guardian of Cottonwood Station's moral fibre. Been that way since her husband was sheriff. She seemed concerned for your reputation. My reputation? He gave a short, humorless laugh. That's rich, coming from this town. There was a story there, Josephine sensed. But now wasn't the time to pry. Mr. Thornton, Gabriel, he interrupted. If you're going to be living under my roof, even temporarily, Mr. Thornton feels unnecessarily formal. Gabriel, then, she conceded. I should make it clear that I have no intention of causing you difficulty. If my presence here is problematic, the only person whose opinion of this arrangement matters is you, he said firmly. And me, I suppose. The rest can mind their own business. Josephine wasn't convinced it would be that simple, but she nodded. Very well. She gestured to the stew pot. I hope you don't mind that I started dinner. I found some vegetables that needed to be used. Not at all. He moved to wash his hands at the basin, though I should warn you, I've got 2 ranch hands coming for supper tonight. Saturday tradition. I forgot to mention it this morning. Oh, Josephine glanced at the pot. I should add more potatoes, then. I can help, Gabriel offered, already rolling up his sleeves. Miguel and Caleb aren't particular eaters, but they've got appetites like wolves. They work together in surprisingly comfortable silence, Josephine chopping additional vegetables while Gabriel kneaded dough for biscuits. It struck her as odd that a bachelor rancher would be so comfortable in the kitchen, but she kept the observation to herself. You're good with a knife, Gabriel commented, noticing the uniform pieces of carrot she was adding to the pot. Years of practice, she replied. My mother taught me to cook when I was barely tall enough to reach the stove, and precision comes naturally when you spend your days cutting patterns for dresses. You're a seamstress. Was, she corrected. The factory closed 6 months ago. I took in mending after that, but it wasn't enough to keep a roof over my head. Gabriel nodded, understanding in his eyes. That's why you answered Blackwood's advertisement. Yes. She focused on her task, unwilling to revisit yesterday's humiliation. It seemed like the only option at the time. No family to help? None living, she said simply. Gabriel didn't press further, a courtesy Josephine appreciated. Instead, he changed the subject. The garden needs attention, if you have any experience with growing things. Some. We had a small vegetable patch behind our house in Boston. She smiled at the memory. My father was determined we should have fresh tomatoes, even with the factory smoke. Did you succeed? Some years. The soil was poor, but he was stubborn. Her smile faded. The influenza took them both in the same week. I sold the house to pay their debts. Gabriel's hands stilled in their work. I'm sorry. The simple words, spoken without pity, were somehow more comforting than all the elaborate condolences she'd received after her parents' deaths. Thank you, she said quietly. Then, eager to move past the painful memory, tell me about these ranch hands who are joining us. Should I expect more scrutiny like Mrs. Sanchez's? Gabriel's expression lightened. Miguel's been with me for 15 years. Caleb only 3. Miguel might eye you suspiciously at first. He's protective of this place. Caleb will be too busy eating to notice much of anything. Josephine laughed, the sound surprising her. It had been so long since she'd had reason to laugh. I'll try not to take offense. "They're good men," Gabriel assured her. "Hard workers, loyal. Like their employer," she observed. He glanced at her, a question in his eyes. "You speak of them with respect," she explained. "Not all ranchers do. They're not servants. They're the reason this ranch functions." He shaped the biscuit dough with practiced hands. That and a fair bit of luck. Before Josephine could respond, the sound of horses approaching drew their attention. Gabriel looked out the window. "That'll be them now." He turned to her with an unexpected look of concern. "Should I introduce you as—" The question hung in the air, a courtesy she hadn't expected. How should she be introduced? As a temporary housekeeper, a stranded traveler? Each option carried implications she wasn't sure she wanted to navigate. "The truth," she decided. "Miss Reed, staying temporarily and helping with the household in exchange for room and board." Gabriel nodded, seeming pleased with her answer. "Simple, direct. I approve." The door opened without a knock, and two men entered. One older with a weathered face and salt and pepper beard, the other younger with ruddy cheeks and an open expression. "Something smells mighty fine, Gabriel," the younger man announced. Then he spotted Josephine and stopped short, his eyes widening. "Miguel, Caleb," Gabriel said calmly. "This is Miss Josephine Reed. She'll be staying here for a time, helping with the house and garden. Miss Reed, Miguel Vasquez, and Caleb Johnson." Miguel's eyes narrowed slightly, assessing her with undisguised suspicion. "Ma'am," he said, tipping his hat, but making no move to approach. Caleb, on the other hand, broke into a wide grin and extended his hand. "Pleasure, Miss Reed. Never thought I'd see the day Gabriel let a lady class up this old place." Josephine shook his hand, finding his enthusiasm oddly refreshing after the day's tensions. "Mr. Johnson, I hope you're hungry. I've made plenty." "Always hungry, ma'am," he assured her with a wink. Dinner was a surprisingly pleasant affair. After an initial period of awkwardness, conversation flowed easily. Caleb was a natural storyteller, regaling them with tales of his adventures before joining the Thornton Ranch. Miguel remained reserved, but thawed noticeably when Josephine asked intelligent questions about the operation of the ranch. "You know something about cattle, Miss Reed?" he asked after she inquired about their breeding program. "Very little," she admitted, "but I believe in understanding the work that puts food on the table." Miguel nodded, apparently satisfied with this answer. "Not many Eastern ladies think that way." "I'm not many Eastern ladies, Mr. Vasquez." This earned her a rare smile from the taciturn foreman. "No, ma'am, I don't suppose you are." As the meal progressed, Josephine found herself watching Gabriel, the way he listened intently to his men, the respect with which he treated their opinions, the occasional dry humor that surfaced in his comments. He was nothing like the man she had imagined would rescue her from spinsterhood in Boston. Samuel Blackwood, with his fine clothes and practiced charm, seemed a pale imitation of manhood compared to Gabriel's quiet strength. Not that she was comparing them as potential husbands, she reminded herself firmly. That dream had died on Cottonwood, station's dusty main street. After dinner, the men moved to the porch to smoke while Josephine cleared the table. Through the open window, she could hear fragments of their conversation. "Town's talking," Miguel was saying, his voice low. "Let them talk," Gabriel replied. "Blackwood's not one to forget a slight," Miguel warned. "Helping a stranded woman isn't a slight. Depends on who's telling the story," Caleb chimed in. Their voices dropped further, and Josephine could no longer make out the words. She finished washing the dishes, trying not to dwell on the implications of their conversation. Whatever complications her presence might create, she would be gone in a week, a fleeting footnote in the story of the Thornton Ranch. When the men returned inside, the conversation turned to ranch business. Josephine excused herself, suddenly, exhausted despite the relatively early hour. "Thank you for dinner, Miss Reed," Miguel said formally. "Best meal I've had in months." "Yeah, no offense to Gabriel's cooking, but you've got a real touch with spices, ma'am," Caleb added with a grin. Josephine smiled. "Thank you both. It was a pleasure meeting you." Gabriel walked her to the door of the spare room. "You did well with them," he said quietly. "Miguel doesn't warm to strangers easily." "They seem like good men," she replied. "You're fortunate to have such loyal help." "I am." He hesitated, seeming on the verge of saying more, then simply added, "Sleep well, Miss Reed." "Josephine," she corrected, surprising herself. "If I'm to call you Gabriel, it seems only fair." Something flickered in his eyes, warmth perhaps, or approval. "Josephine, then, good night." As she closed the door behind her, Josephine was struck by the strangeness of her situation. 24 hours ago, she had been Samuel Blackwood's mail-order bride, filled with hope for a new beginning. Now she was, what exactly? Temporary housekeeper to a man who seemed as wounded in his own way as she was. A charity case being given a week's reprieve before facing harsh reality again. She moved to the window, looking out at the moonlit landscape. The distant mountains were silver-tipped in the night, silent sentinels watching over the valley. The vastness of it calmed her somehow, putting her troubles in perspective. One day at a time, she reminded herself, one day at a time. 3 days passed with surprising swiftness. Josephine fell into a rhythm at the Thornton Ranch, rising early to prepare breakfast before Gabriel headed out to work the cattle. Mornings were devoted to household tasks, cleaning, mending, baking bread that filled the cabin with a homey aroma that seemed to please Gabriel more than he would admit. Afternoons found her in the garden, reclaiming it from the weeds that had flourished in neglect. On this particular afternoon, Josephine knelt in the rich soil, transplanting seedlings from the small greenhouse attached to the barn. The sun warmed her shoulders through the faded indigo work dress, and the breeze carried the scent of sage from the nearby hills. She had tied her hair back with a strip of cloth and rolled her sleeves to the elbow, practicality winning over propriety. "You've got a way with growing things," Gabriel observed, approaching from the direction of the corral. He had been breaking, a young stallion all morning, and dust clung to his clothes and hair. Josephine sat back on her heels, wiping her brow with the back of her hand. "Plants ask for little, just consistent care and attention." She gestured to the rows of vegetables now standing in orderly formation. "It's satisfying work. You can see the results of your efforts." "Unlike cattle," Gabriel said with a wry smile. "Ornery beasts that seem determined to undo a day's work in 5 minutes flat." Josephine laughed, the sound coming more easily now than it had days ago. "The stallion giving you trouble?" "Nothing I can't handle." He offered her his hand, helping her to her feet. "But I could use some of that lemonade you made yesterday if there's any left." "There is." She brushed the soil from her skirt. "I'll bring it to the porch." They had fallen into this comfortable pattern, brief conversations throughout the day, shared meals, evenings spent on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains in hues of gold and crimson. It was easy, this arrangement between them. Perhaps too easy, Josephine sometimes thought, for something meant to be temporary. She was retrieving the lemonade from the root cellar when the sound of approaching horses drew her attention. Through the window, she saw a group of riders coming up the main road. 5 men, led by a figure she recognized with a jolt of dismay, Samuel Blackwood. Gabriel had seen them too. He stood in the yard, his posture alert but not yet hostile as the riders approached. Josephine set down the pitcher and moved to the door, anxiety pooling in her stomach. "Thornton!" Samuel called, reining in his horse a few yards from where Gabriel stood. "Thought I'd pay a neighborly visit." "Blackwood?" Gabriel's voice revealed nothing. "Don't recall the last time you rode out this way." Samuel dismounted, his movements deliberate. He was dressed more formally than the situation warranted. Polished boots, a fine waistcoat beneath his riding coat, a watch chain gleaming in the sunlight, calculated to emphasize the contrast between his prosperity and Gabriel's more modest circumstances. "Been busy," Samuel replied, his gaze sliding to Josephine in the doorway. "Miss Reed, I see you found accommodation." Josephine stepped onto the porch, determined not to cower. "Mr. Blackwood, what brings you and your friends so far from town?" The men with Samuel remained mounted, their expressions ranging from curious to openly hostile. Josephine recognized one as Collins, the man from the cafe who had witnessed her humiliation. Another wore a deputy's badge, though his youth suggested limited experience. "Heard you were staying out at the Thornton place," Samuel said, his tone pleasant but his eyes cold. "Got concerned about your welfare." "My welfare," Josephine echoed incredulously. "A single woman alone at a remote ranch with a bachelor of—" He paused meaningfully. "Questionable reputation. Folks in town were worried." Gabriel's jaw tightened, but his voice remained calm. "Miss Reed is employed here as my housekeeper. Nothing improper about that." Samuel raised an eyebrow. "Is that what they're calling it these days?" One of his companions snickered. Josephine felt heat rise in her cheeks, not from embarrassment but from anger. "I believe Mr. Thornton has made the situation clear, Mr. Blackwood. I'm earning my keep until I have sufficient funds to move on." "Very convenient arrangement," Samuel observed, "especially for a woman who arrived in town with nothing but the clothes on her back." He turned to Gabriel. "Didn't figure you for a charity case, Thornton. And I didn't figure you for a coward." "Blackwood," Gabriel replied evenly. "Yet here you are, bringing 4 men to back you in a conversation that could have been handled alone." Samuel's smile tightened. "Just being cautious. Your temper's well known in these parts." "Only to those who provoke it." Gabriel crossed his arms. "State your business plainly. My time's valuable, even if yours isn't." The deputy shifted uncomfortably in his saddle. "Mr. Blackwood reported concerns about the lady's situation, Mr. Thornton. As an officer of the law—" "As Blackwood's errand boy," Gabriel interrupted. "You've got no authority here, Taylor, unless you've got a warrant or evidence of wrongdoing." The young deputy flushed. "Well, no, but then this is trespassing," Gabriel stated flatly, "and harassment." Samuel stepped forward, his cordial facade slipping. "You think you're untouchable out here, don't you, Thornton? Town council might be interested to know you're harboring a woman of questionable virtue." Before Gabriel could respond, Josephine descended the porch steps, rage propelling her forward. "Questionable virtue? Because I had the misfortune of putting my faith in a man who values money over character, or because I accepted honest work instead of begging on the streets after you discarded me like unwanted baggage?" Samuel blinked, clearly not expecting such direct confrontation. "Now, Miss Reed, no." She cut him off, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "You rejected me publicly, Mr. Blackwood, made me a spectacle, left me with nowhere to go. Mr. Thornton offered me employment when you offered only humiliation, and now you dare to question my virtue." The men on horseback exchanged glances, seemingly uncomfortable with this turn in the conversation. Even Collins had the grace to look away. Samuel's expression hardened. "You're making a mistake, Miss Reed. Thornton isn't what he seems." "Neither were you," she retorted. "At least he's been honest from the start." "Honest?" Samuel barked a laugh. "Did he tell you why his sister left? Why half the town won't do business with him? Did he tell you about the Vasquez property?" Gabriel moved with unexpected swiftness, grabbing Samuel by the front of his expensive coat. "That's enough, Blackwood." The other men immediately tensed, hands moving to their weapons. The deputy dismounted, his inexperience evident in his nervous demeanor. "Mr. Thornton, I'm going to have to ask you to release Mr. Blackwood," he said, his hand resting uneasily on his holstered pistol. For a moment the tableau held, Gabriel's knuckles white against Samuel's coat, the mounted men waiting for a signal, Josephine frozen in place. Then Gabriel released Samuel with a slight shove, stepping back. "Get off my property," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "All of you." Samuel straightened his coat, a triumphant gleam in his eye. Showing your true colors, Thornton. Just like always. He turned to Josephine. When you tire of playing housekeeper, to a man with blood on his hands, Cottonwood Station's not without charity. The church ladies might take pity on you. I don't need pity, Josephine said coldly. Yours or theirs, Samuel shrugged and remounted his horse. Your choice, Miss Reed, but don't say you weren't warned. He looked down at Gabriel. Town council meets Tuesday, might be discussing water rights to that stream that feeds your south pasture. Shame if the vote went against you. With that parting threat, he wheeled his horse around and rode off, his companions following. The deputy lingered a moment longer, looking uncomfortable. No offense meant, Mr. Thornton, he said quietly. Just doing my job. Your job is upholding the law, Taylor, Gabriel replied. Not being Blackwood's puppet. Your father would be disappointed. The young man's face fell at that, and he mounted hastily, spurring his horse to catch up with the others. Silence descended as the dust from the rider's departure settled. Josephine became aware of her trembling hands and clenched them to stop their movement. Gabriel stood rigid, staring after the retreating figures, tension radiating from every line of his body. Gabriel, she said gently, using his given name, deliberately to break through his anger. What was that about? He didn't answer immediately. When he finally turned to face her, his expression was shuttered in a way it hadn't been since her arrival. You should probably start packing. The words struck like a physical blow. What? Blackwood won't stop. Gabriel ran a hand through his hair, a rare gesture of agitation. He'll make good on his threats, to me and to your reputation. Better if you leave now. Get ahead of whatever story he's spinning in town. Josephine stared at him, disbelieving. You're sending me away? I'm trying to protect you. He snapped, then immediately softened his tone. Blackwood has influence. He can make life impossible for both of us if he chooses. So we let him win, Josephine challenged. I run away, proving whatever vile rumors he's spreading, and you... What, lose your water rights because you dared to help me? Gabriel's expression darkened. It's more complicated than that. Then explain it to me, she insisted. What did he mean about your sister, about the Vasquez property? For a moment she thought he might refuse. Then his shoulders sagged slightly. Let's go inside. This isn't a conversation to have standing. In the yard. In the house, Gabriel poured 2 glasses of whiskey from a bottle he kept on a high shelf. He offered one to Josephine, who accepted it without comment, despite never having touched spirits before. They sat at the table, the afternoon light casting long shadows across the plank floor. Isabella left 3 years ago, Gabriel began after. A long silence. She's my half-sister, same father, different mothers. She came to live with me after our father died. He took a small sip of his whiskey. She was 19, willful, beautiful, like our mother had been. Josephine waited, sensing. There was more to the story. Samuel Blackwood was 40 then, already established in town. He started calling on Isabella, brought her gifts, took her driving on Sundays. His knuckles whitened around his glass. I didn't trust him. His interest seemed calculated. Our father had left her a small inheritance, to be managed by me until she turned 25. And Blackwood knew this, Josephine guessed. Gabriel nodded. I told Isabella my concerns. She accused me of trying to control her life, of being jealous of Blackwood's success. A muscle worked in his jaw. Then one night, she didn't come home. I found her at Blackwood's ranch, distraught. She wouldn't tell me what happened, but she never spoke to him again. He hurt her, Josephine said softly. It wasn't a question. In some way, yes. But she wouldn't say how, and I couldn't prove anything. Gabriel's eyes darkened with old rage. A week later, she announced she was going to San Francisco to stay with our aunt. I tried to convince her to stay, but he trailed off. She needed to get away, Josephine finished for him. From the memories, from the town's gossip. Yes. He took another sip of whiskey. Blackwood spread rumors that I had driven her away out of jealousy, that I was controlling her inheritance for my own gain. It divided the town, those who believed him and those who knew me better. Josephine thought of Harriet Sanchez's protective, a visit, of Miguel's loyalty, and the Vasquez property. What was that about? Gabriel's expression grew more troubled. Carlos Vasquez, Miguel's uncle, owned the property bordering mine to the east. Good water access, excellent grazing land. He was an old man, lived alone. We were friends of a sort. He had no family except Miguel. He rose and moved to the window, staring out at the land, as if seeing the past play out before him. Vasquez died suddenly. Heart failure, the doctor said. In his will, he left his property to me. Blackwood had been courting him as well, bringing him into town for council meetings, offering to buy his land. When the will was read, Blackwood accused me of coercion, even suggested I might have had something to do with Vasquez's death. That's absurd, Josephine gasped. Surely no one believed that. Some did, enough to create doubt. Gabriel turned back to face her. The will stood, it was properly executed, witnessed by the town judge. But Blackwood has been working against me ever since, blocking cattle sales, interfering with water rights, turning opinion against me wherever he can. And now he sees me as another weapon to use against you, Josephine said, understanding dawning. My presence here gives him fresh ammunition. Precisely. Gabriel returned to the table but didn't sit. So you see why it might be better if you left. Not just for your sake, but for mine as well. Josephine considered his words carefully. She had come to Arizona seeking security, a place to belong. Instead, she had walked into a years-long feud, and now found herself being used as a pawn. In a game she hadn't chosen to play, the practical choice would be to leave, to take what little money she had earned and make her way to Phoenix as planned. Start fresh where neither Samuel's rejection nor Gabriel's complicated past could touch her. But something in her rebelled at the thought. Running away had never been her nature, even when staying meant hardship. What if I don't want to leave? She asked quietly. Gabriel looked startled. Did you not hear what I just told you? Blackwood will do whatever he plans to do regardless, she interrupted. My leaving won't stop his vendetta against you. It will only prove he has the power to disrupt your life whenever he chooses. And what about your reputation? The gossip? Josephine gave a small, bitter laugh. My reputation was compromised the moment I stepped off that train, Mr. Thornton. I was judged and found wanting before I spoke a single word to Samuel Blackwood. She met his gaze steadily. I didn't let his rejection define me then. I won't let his threats define me now. Gabriel studied her face, something like admiration flickering in his amber eyes. You're not what I expected, Josephine Reed. No, she agreed with a slight smile. I imagine not. He returned to his seat, considering. If you stay, it won't be easy. Blackwood has a long reach in this county. Few worthwhile things in life are easy, she replied, but I won't stay where I'm not wanted. If you truly believe my presence endangers your ranch or your standing, it's not that, Gabriel said quickly. Your presence has been, he searched for the right word, valuable. The simple acknowledgement warmed her more than it should. Then I'll stay, at least until our week is concluded, as agreed. She straightened her shoulders. And I'll face whatever Samuel Blackwood chooses to throw at us. Gabriel nodded slowly. All right, but we'll need to be careful. Blackwood doesn't make idle threats. Neither do I, Josephine said with quiet determination. And I've survived worse than a small-town bully with an inflated sense of importance. A rare smile curved Gabriel's lips. I believe you have. He raised his glass slightly. To standing firm, Josephine lifted her own glass, the amber liquid catching the late afternoon light. To standing firm. They drank, the whiskey burning a path down Josephine's throat and settling warmly in her stomach. Outside, the sun began its descent toward the western mountains, bathing the land in golden light. The day's confrontation had changed something between them, a shared adversary, creating an unexpected alliance. Josephine knew staying was risky. Samuel's veiled accusations in the deputy's presence had made that clear. But running had never solved her problems before, and she doubted it would now. Better to face whatever came next with dignity and resolve, and if part of her decision to stay stemmed from a growing attachment to this place and the man across from her, well, that was a complication she would examine another day, the next. Morning dawned clear and cool, with no sign of the previous day's tensions. Josephine rose early, determined to maintain their established routine despite Samuel's ominous visit. She was kneading dough for breakfast biscuits when a sharp knock at the door startled her. Gabriel emerged from his room, still buttoning his shirt. "Stay back," he warned, reaching for the rifle he kept mounted near the door. "Gabriel," she protested. Surely Blackwood wouldn't. But he had already opened the door, rifle held casually but ready. Instead of Samuel or his men, however, a young boy of perhaps 12 stood on the porch, shifting nervously from foot to foot. "Got a telegram for Mr. Thornton," the boy announced, holding out a yellow envelope. Mr. Johnson at the office said, "It was urgent." Gabriel lowered the rifle and took the telegram, fishing in his pocket for a coin, which he tossed to the boy. "Thanks, Tommy. Tell your mother I said hello." The boy nodded, pocketed the coin, and raced back to his waiting pony. Josephine watched as Gabriel opened the envelope, his expression growing more troubled as he read its contents. "Bad news?" she asked when he finally looked up. "From my sister," he replied, his voice tense. "She's coming home, arriving on tomorrow's stage." Josephine wasn't sure why this would be cause for concern. "Isn't that good news?" "Under normal circumstances, yes." He handed her the telegram. But her timing couldn't be worse. Josephine read the brief message. "Arriving tomorrow's afternoon stage stop. Urgent matters to discuss. Sorry for short notice. All will be explained. Isabella." "I don't understand," Josephine said, returning the telegram. "Why is this a problem?" Gabriel's expression was grim. "Because Isabella hasn't been back to Cottonwood Station since the incident with Blackwood. Because she knows nothing about you. And because urgent matters from my sister has never meant anything good." Josephine felt a cold weight settle in her stomach. "You think this has something to do with Blackwood?" "I think it's too much of a coincidence that she's returning now, immediately after Blackwood made his threats." Gabriel folded the telegram and tucked it into his shirt pocket. "Whatever the reason, we need to prepare. Isabella can be difficult." "I should leave before she arrives," Josephine said, the words tasting bitter in her mouth. "It would be easier for you both." Gabriel looked at her sharply. "What happened to standing firm?" "That was before your sister's impending arrival," she pointed out. "I won't come between family, Gabriel." "You're not," he insisted. "Isabella left of her own accord, and whatever her urgent matters are, they won't change the fact that you have a place here for as long as you need it." The conviction in his voice touched her deeply. "Are you sure?" "I'm sure." He moved closer, stopping just short of touching her. "Josephine, I meant what I said yesterday. Your presence here has been valuable, more than I expected." There was something in his eyes, something beyond the simple appreciation of an employer. For a competent housekeeper, something that made her heart beat faster and her cheeks warm. The moment stretched between them, fragile and full of possibility. Then Gabriel stepped back, clearing his throat. "I should ride into town, see if I can learn anything more about Isabella's return. Maybe talk to Judge Henderson about Blackwood's own threats." Josephine nodded, both disappointed and relieved by the return to practicalities. "I'll have dinner ready when you return, and I'll prepare the spare room for your sister." "You're sleeping in the spare room," Gabriel pointed out. "I can make up a bed in the storage room," she replied. "It's small, but it will suffice for a few nights." Gabriel frowned. "That won't be necessary. Isabella can take my room. I'll sleep in the barn until we sort things out." "But it's decided," he said firmly. "I won't have you sleeping in a storage closet when there's a perfectly good bed available." Josephine recognized the stubborn set of his jaw and conceded with a nod. "Very well, but I'll still prepare your room for her arrival. Thank you." He reached for his hat and coat. "I won't be long." "And Gabriel?" He paused at the door. "Don't worry about Isabella or Blackwood. We'll weather this storm together." With that promise hanging in the air, he departed, leaving Josephine alone with her thoughts and the dough still waiting to be shaped into biscuits. She returned to her task, her mind spinning with possibilities and concerns. Whatever storm was gathering on the horizon, she had made her choice to stand firm beside Gabriel Thornton. Now she would have to face the consequences, be they Isabella's arrival, Samuel's malice, or the growing feelings she could no longer ignore. Josephine rose before dawn on the day of Isabella's arrival, unable to sleep with anxiety twisting in her stomach. She moved quietly through the dimly lit house, careful not to wake Gabriel, who had returned late from town the previous evening with a troubled expression and little information. She lit the stove and began preparations for a substantial breakfast, finding comfort in the familiar rhythm of cooking. By the time sunlight streamed through the kitchen window, she had fresh bread cooling on the counter, eggs and bacon ready to cook, and coffee brewing. Gabriel emerged from his room, his hair still damp from washing. He paused in the doorway, watching her work. "You didn't need to go to all this trouble," he said. Josephine glanced up, offering a small smile. "It helps me think, and we should both eat well before—" She trailed off, not needing to finish the thought. Gabriel nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Did you sleep at all?" "A little." She turned her attention back to the eggs sizzling in the pan. "Did you learn anything useful in town?" "Not about Isabella." He moved to pour them both coffee. "But Blackwood's been busy. Called a special meeting of the town council for this afternoon. Topic listed as moral concerns within the community." Josephine's hand faltered slightly as she served the eggs. "He's not wasting any time." "No," Gabriel agreed grimly. "He never does." They ate in companionable silence, both lost in their own thoughts. Josephine used the time to study Gabriel's face, the lines of worry etched around his eyes, the stubborn set of his jaw. In just a few days, this man had become important to her in ways she hadn't anticipated. The thought of causing him additional difficulty with the town or his sister weighed heavily on her conscience. "I could still go," she said quietly, setting down her fork. "Take the morning stage to Phoenix. Be gone before Isabella arrives." Gabriel's gaze snapped to hers. "Is that what you want?" "No," she admitted. "But it might be the simplest solution." "Simple isn't always right." He reached across the table, stopping just short of touching her hand. "Josephine, I won't force you to stay in a difficult situation. If you want to leave, I'll understand. But don't do it just to spare me complications with Isabella or Blackwood." The conviction in his voice steadied her. "All right, I'll stay at least until we see what Isabella's visit entails." Relief flashed across his features. "Good. And Gabriel, thank you for the breakfast, for everything you've done here." There was a warmth in his words that sent a flutter through her chest, but before she could respond, the sound of an approaching wagon drew their attention. Gabriel rose and moved to the window. "It's Miguel," he reported. "Earlier than usual." Josephine cleared their plates as Gabriel went to meet his foreman. Through the open window, she could hear fragments of their conversation. "Telegram from Henderson," Miguel was saying. "Water board inspectors coming tomorrow." "Blackwood's work," Gabriel replied, his voice hard. "Right on schedule." Josephine couldn't make out Miguel's response, but Gabriel's voice rose slightly. "They won't find anything irregular. We've always played by the rules." She was wiping down the table when Gabriel returned, tension radiating from his tall frame. "Problem?" she asked. "Just Blackwood pulling strings," he replied, jaw tight. "The territorial water inspector suddenly needs to examine our usage rights. Coincidental timing, wouldn't you say?" "Very," she agreed. "Is it serious?" "Could be. The stream that feeds our southern pasture is crucial for the cattle." He ran a hand through his hair. "If they restrict our access or rule against our claim..." He didn't need to finish. Josephine had learned enough about ranching to understand that water rights could make or break an operation, especially with summer approaching. "What can I do to help?" she asked simply. Gabriel's expression softened. "Just having someone else to shoulder this is..." He paused, seeming surprised by his own admission. "It helps." The moment stretched between them, filled with unspoken words. Then Gabriel cleared his throat. "I should check the property lines before the stage arrives. Make sure everything's in order for tomorrow's inspection." "Of course," Josephine nodded. "I'll finish preparing for Isabella's arrival." After Gabriel departed, Josephine threw herself into work with renewed determination. She swept and dusted Gabriel's bedroom, putting fresh linens on the bed and arranging wildflowers on the dresser. She scrubbed the kitchen floor until it gleamed, polished the stove to a shine, and put a stew on to simmer for dinner. Physical labor helped keep her anxiety at bay, but as midday approached, her nerves returned in full force. What kind of woman was Isabella Thornton? Would she resent Josephine's presence in her childhood home? And what urgent matter had brought her back to a place that held such painful memories? The answers would have to wait. Gabriel returned from his property inspection. Just as the clock struck 2, he changed quickly into a clean shirt and joined Josephine in the main room. "The stage should arrive around 3, he said, his typical composure betrayed by the way he repeatedly checked his pocket watch. "We should head into town." Josephine smoothed her dress, the indigo one from Isabella's trunk, now altered to fit her slender frame. "Do you want me to come with you? Perhaps it would be better if I stayed here." "No," Gabriel said decisively. "Better to face this head-on. Isabella will hear about you regardless. Better she meets you properly than relies." On town gossip, the ride into town passed in tense silence. Josephine couldn't help noticing how different this journey felt from her first arrival in Cottonwood Station. Then she had been full of hope, imagining a future with a man she had never met. Now she rode beside a man she had come to admire deeply, uncertain what the coming hours would bring. Cottonwood Station looked much as she remembered it, dusty, sparse, with the same sense of frontier impermanence. But this time she noticed how heads turned as they passed, how conversations halted and eyes followed their progress down the main street. Samuel Blackwood's influence at work, no doubt. They tethered the wagon near the stage depot, a simple wooden structure with a bench outside where passengers could wait for departures. Several townspeople milled about, ostensibly on afternoon errands, but clearly interested in the arrival of both the stage and Gabriel Thornton, with the mysterious woman who had been staying at his ranch. Gabriel offered his arm as they crossed. To the depot, a public declaration that Josephine was under his protection. She accepted it gratefully, holding her head high despite the whispers that followed them. "Quite the audience," she murmured. "Small towns," Gabriel replied, echoing his words from days earlier. "Not much stays secret for long." They took a position slightly apart from the others, Gabriel's posture alert but outwardly calm. Only the tightness around his eyes betrayed his tension. The wait seemed interminable. Josephine found herself studying the faces around them, wondering which belonged to Blackwood's allies and which might be neutral or even sympathetic to Gabriel's position. The young deputy, Taylor, lounged against a hitching post nearby, clearly assigned to observe them. Finally, the distant rumble of wheels and the cloud of dust on the horizon announced the stage's approach. Josephine felt Gabriel stiffen beside her, his arm tensing under her hand. "It will be all right," she said quietly, surprising herself with the assurance. Gabriel glanced down at her, a flicker of gratitude in his amber eyes. "Let's hope so." The stagecoach rattled to a stop in a cloud of dust and commotion. The driver secured the team, while the attendant opened the door for the passengers. Two men disembarked first, a traveling salesman by the look of his sample case, and an older gentleman who was greeted enthusiastically by a woman Josephine assumed was his wife. Then a slender figure appeared in the doorway, pausing to survey the gathered crowd. Even from a distance, the family resemblance was unmistakable, the same straight nose and determined chin as Gabriel, though on a decidedly feminine face, framed by dark hair styled in the latest fashion. She wore a traveling suit of deep burgundy, the quality of the fabric speaking of city prosperity. Isabella Thornton had returned to Cottonwood Station, and she looked nothing like the heartbroken girl who had fled 3 years earlier. Gabriel moved forward, Josephine a half-step behind. "Isabella," he called, his voice betraying nothing of his anxiety. Isabella's eyes found her brother, and a complex emotion crossed her features: relief, weariness, and something that might have been regret. "Gabriel," she stepped down without waiting for the attendant's assistance, moving with the confidence of a woman accustomed to city life. Brother and sister stood facing each other for a moment, the tension almost palpable. Then Isabella smiled, a small tentative thing, and Gabriel pulled her into a brief, awkward embrace. "You look well," he said as they separated. "So do you," she replied, her gaze shifting to Josephine with undisguised curiosity. "And who might this be?" Gabriel straightened. "Isabella, this is Miss Josephine Reed. She's been staying at the ranch this past week. Josephine, my sister, Isabella Thornton." Josephine extended her hand, determined to make a good impression despite her nerves. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Miss Thornton. Your brother has spoken highly of you." Isabella's handshake was firm, her assessment frank and unabashed. How interesting. Gabriel rarely speaks highly of anyone." She turned back to her brother. "My trunk should be on top. I assume you brought the wagon." "Of course," Gabriel replied, moving to help the driver unload her luggage. Left alone with Isabella, Josephine maintained her composure despite the younger woman's continued scrutiny. "I've prepared your old room for you," she offered. "I hope you'll find everything to your satisfaction." "My old room," Isabella repeated, something unreadable in her tone. "And where are you sleeping, Miss Reed?" The question's implication was clear. Josephine met her gaze steadily. "Your brother has been kind enough to offer me the spare room while I'm employed as his housekeeper." "Housekeeper?" Isabella echoed, arching one perfectly shaped eyebrow. "How convenient for both of you." Before Josephine could respond, Gabriel returned with Isabella's trunk secured on his shoulder. "Everything's loaded. We should get back to the ranch before dark." The ride home was strained, with Isabella seated between them on the wagon bench. She made polite inquiries about the ranch and the town, but avoided any mention of why she had returned so suddenly, or what urgent matters she needed to discuss. As they passed the turnoff to the Blackwood property, Isabella stiffened visibly. "Is he still on the town council?" she asked, breaking a lengthy silence. Gabriel nodded grimly. "And gaining influence by the day." Isabella's delicate jaw tightened, a gesture so reminiscent of her brother that Josephine couldn't help but notice the family resemblance despite their different coloring. Some things never change, and some do, Gabriel replied, his tone gentle but firm. You're not 19 anymore, Isabella, and this isn't the same town you left. No, she agreed, her gaze sliding briefly to Josephine. It certainly isn't. The sun was setting by the time they reached the ranch, painting the landscape in shades of gold and amber. Isabella surveyed the property as they approached, her expression softening slightly. You've kept it up, she observed. The garden looks better than when I left. That's Josephine's doing, Gabriel said. She's got a way with growing things. Isabella glanced at Josephine with renewed interest. Is that so? I could never get anything to thrive in this soil. Too stubborn, Gabriel always said. The soil, or you? Gabriel asked, a hint of their old relationship surfacing in the gentle teasing. Both, Isabella admitted with a small smile that transformed her face from merely pretty to strikingly beautiful. Josephine could understand why Samuel Blackwood had pursued her, though she suspected her inheritance had been an even greater attraction. Inside, the house was warm and welcoming, the stew Josephine had prepared filling the air with savory aromas. Isabella paused in the doorway, taking in the polished surfaces, the fresh flowers, the general air of care that had been lacking during her last residence. It feels different, she said quietly. Less empty, Gabriel supplied. Isabella nodded. You'd then turned to Josephine. You've done more than tend the garden, it seems. I enjoy creating a comfortable home, Josephine replied simply. Your brother has been very kind to give me the opportunity. Isabella studied her thoughtfully, then seemed to come to some decision. I imagine you're both curious about why I've returned so suddenly. Gabriel gestured to the table. Let's eat. Eat first, then we can talk. The meal passed pleasantly enough, with Isabella sharing stories of her life in San Francisco, where she had apparently secured a position as a clerk in a law office. Not the usual employment for a woman, she admitted, but Judge Morales, Aunt Martha's neighbor, took an interest in my education, said I had a mind for details. You always did, Gabriel agreed. Even as a child you noticed everything. A shadow crossed Isabella's face. Not everything, not when it mattered. The mood shifted perceptibly. Josephine rose to clear the plates, offering them privacy, but Isabella stopped her with a raised hand. Please stay, Miss Reed. What I have to say concerns you as well, in a way. Josephine resumed her seat, exchanging a puzzled glance with Gabriel. Isabella took a deep breath. I received a letter from Harriet Sanchez 3 days ago. She mentioned that Gabriel had taken in a woman, a mail-order bride rejected by Samuel Blackwood, and that Blackwood was using it to renew his campaign against the ranch. Gabriel's expression hardened. Harriet should mind her own business. She was concerned, Isabella countered, and rightly so. Blackwood never needs much excuse to cause trouble. And you rushed back from San Francisco because of town gossip? Gabriel asked skeptically. Isabella hesitated, then reached into her pocket and withdrew a folded document. No, I came back because of this. She placed the paper on the table and smoothed it flat. Josephine could see it was a legal document of some kind, with official seals and signatures at the bottom. What is it? Gabriel asked, reaching for the paper. A notice of intent to claim, Isabella replied. Blackwood is petitioning the territorial court to invalidate Carlos Vasquez's will on grounds of undue influence. He's making another play for the Vasquez property and by extension control of the water rights to half your ranch. Gabriel scanned the document, his expression growing darker with each line. He can't do this. The will was properly executed, witnessed by Judge Henderson himself. Judge Henderson is retiring next month, Isabella pointed out. His replacement is a man named Mitchell, recently arrived from St. Louis, and coincidentally, a former business associate of Blackwood's father. Convenient timing, Josephine observed quietly. Isabella's sharp gaze turned to her. Very, Just as it's convenient that Blackwood suddenly has a witness claiming to have overheard Vasquez complaining that Gabriel was pressuring him about the will. "That's a lie," Gabriel growled. "Carlos was my friend. He left me that land because he didn't want Blackwood turning it into another showcase for his ego." "I believe you," Isabella assured him, "but it's your word against their fabricated witness, and with your current situation—" She glanced meaningfully at Josephine. "My situation has nothing to do with this," Gabriel snapped. Isabella leaned forward, her expression earnest. "Gabriel, I know you believe that, but Blackwood is using Miss Reed's presence here to paint you as morally compromised. He's telling people that if you'd take advantage of a vulnerable woman, you'd certainly take advantage of an elderly neighbor." Josephine felt as if she'd been struck. "That's why you came back," she said softly, "to warn Gabriel that I'm endangering his claim to the Vasquez property." Isabella had the grace to look uncomfortable. "Partly, but also because I know Blackwood. I know how he operates, how he twists the truth to suit his purposes." Her voice hardened. "And I owe him some justice of my own." Gabriel reached across the table to grasp his sister's hand. "Isabella, whatever happened between you and Blackwood—" "No!" She cut him off sharply. "We're not discussing that, not now." She withdrew her hand and turned to Josephine. "Miss Reed, I apologize if I seemed cold earlier. I needed to assess the situation for myself, to understand what kind of woman would choose to stay in such a complicated arrangement." "And have you made your assessment?" Josephine asked, meeting her gaze steadily. A hint of respect flickered in Isabella's eyes. "I believe I have. You're either very brave or very desperate, perhaps both." "Isabella," Gabriel warned. "It's all right," Josephine assured him. "Your sister is right to be concerned." She faced Isabella directly. "I was desperate when I arrived in Cottonwood Station. I had nowhere to go, no means to support myself. Your brother offered me shelter and honest work when Samuel Blackwood offered only humiliation. I stayed because it seemed the best option available to me." She paused, choosing her next words carefully. "But I won't stay if my presence jeopardizes your brother's property or standing." Isabella studied her thoughtfully. "Noble sentiment, but it may be too late for that. Blackwood has already set his plan in motion." "Then we fight back," Gabriel declared. "I won't let him steal land that rightfully belongs to this ranch, and I won't send Josephine away just because it might look better to some territorial judge." "It's not that simple," Isabella argued. "Blackwood has connections, money, influence, and now he has a legal strategy that might actually work." "What do you suggest, then?" Gabriel demanded. Isabella hesitated, glancing between them. "There is one option that would neutralize part of his argument, a way to remove the question of impropriety." Josephine felt a cold weight settle in her stomach, suddenly understanding where Isabella was heading. Miss Reed could leave, Isabella continued, confirming Josephine's suspicion. Return east or continue to Phoenix as she planned. With her gone, Blackwood loses one of his weapons against you. The room fell silent, save for the ticking of the old clock on the mantel. Josephine stared at her folded hands, emotions warring within her. The logical part of her knew Isabella was right. Her departure would simplify Gabriel's legal battle. But the thought of leaving, of never seeing him again, created an unexpected ache in her chest. Gabriel's voice, when he finally spoke, was low and controlled. "That's not an option," Isabella sighed. "Gabriel, be reasonable. The ranch—" I said. "No," he interrupted, an edge of steel in his tone. "Josephine stays if she wishes to stay. I won't have Blackwood dictating who can live under my roof. Even if it costs you half your water rights. Even if it means financial ruin," Isabella challenged. "Yes," Gabriel said simply. The single word hung in the air between them. Josephine looked up, meeting Gabriel's gaze across the table. What she saw there, determination, protectiveness, and something deeper she hardly dared name, stole her breath. "There must be another way," she said softly. Isabella watched the exchange, her expression shifting from frustration to thoughtful consideration. "Perhaps there is," she said slowly. "A different solution entirely." Gabriel turned to his sister. "What are you thinking?" A calculating smile spread across Isabella's face. "I'm thinking that Blackwood's entire argument hinges on the impropriety of your living arrangement, on the suggestion that you're a man of questionable character who takes advantage of vulnerable situations." "Yes," Gabriel agreed impatiently. "We've established that." "So we remove that argument," Isabella continued, "not by sending Miss Reed away, but by changing the nature of her presence here." Josephine frowned. "I don't understand." Isabella's smile widened. "It's quite simple. Really, if the concern is a single woman living unchaperoned with a bachelor, Isabella," Gabriel warned, beginning to see where she was heading, "then the solution is to ensure she's no longer a single woman living with a bachelor," Isabella finished. Triumphantly. "You should marry her, Gabriel," Josephine gasped, heat flooding her cheeks. "That's absurd," Gabriel stated flatly, though his eyes remained fixed on Josephine's face. "Is it?" Isabella pressed. "It solves the immediate problem. Blackwood can't claim impropriety if you're legally wed. The court would view it as a legitimate marriage rather than a questionable arrangement, and it strengthens your position as a stable, respectable landowner committed to building a life here." "You're suggesting we marry for convenience," Gabriel stated flatly, "to outmaneuver Blackwood." "I'm suggesting you consider all options," Isabella countered, "including ones that might benefit you both beyond the immediate crisis." Josephine found her voice at last. "Miss Thornton, while I appreciate your creative thinking, marriage is hardly a solution to be proposed so casually. Your brother and I barely know each other. You know each other better than most couples who enter arranged marriages," Isabella pointed out. "You've lived under the same roof, shared meals, faced a common enemy. That's more than many have when they wed." She leaned forward. "And don't tell me there's nothing between you. I've seen how you look at each other." "Isabella, enough," Gabriel said sharply. "This is not a decision to be made tonight over dinner, under duress." His sister sat back, unperturbed by his tone. "Of course not. I'm merely presenting an option." She rose from the table. "It's been a long day and I'm tired from my journey. We can discuss strategies further in the morning." With that, she bid them good night and retired to Gabriel's room, leaving Josephine and Gabriel alone in a silence charged with unspoken thoughts. "I apologize for my sister," Gabriel said finally. "She's always been direct." "It's all right," Josephine assured him, though her heart still raced at the unexpected proposal. "She's trying to help, in her way." Gabriel rubbed a hand across his face, suddenly looking exhausted. Help or meddle? With Isabella, it's often hard to tell the difference. Josephine began gathering the dishes, needing physical activity to settle her nerves. "She's right about one thing. My presence here complicates your situation with Blackwood and the property claim." Gabriel joined her at the wash basin, taking a dish to dry. "My situation with Blackwood was complicated long before you arrived. Josephine, don't take that burden on yourself." They worked in silence for a few moments, the simple domestic task a counterpoint to the turmoil of emotions between them. "What are you thinking?" Gabriel asked quietly. Josephine set down the last plate carefully. "I'm thinking that I came to Arizona seeking security and found chaos instead. I'm thinking that I've brought difficulty to a man who showed me nothing but kindness." She turned to face him. "And I'm thinking that your sister's suggestion, while shocking, is not as absurd as it perhaps should be." Gabriel's eyes widened slightly. "Josephine, not because of Blackwood or the property," she continued quickly, "but because—" She faltered, courage failing her. "Because?" he prompted gently. "Because in less than a week, "This place has begun to feel like home," she admitted softly. "And you have become important to me." Gabriel stepped closer, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him. "You've become important to me too, Josephine. More than I expected. More than might be wise, given the circumstances." The confession hung between them, neither quite ready to reach for what it offered. Outside, the wind had risen, rattling the windows, as if nature itself was unsettled by the evening's revelations. "We should sleep," Josephine said finally. "Tomorrow will bring its own challenges." Gabriel nodded, though he made no move to step away. "Whatever we decide, Josephine, know this. I won't let Blackwood drive you away unless that's what you truly want. Not for my property, not for my reputation, not for anything." The conviction in his voice wrapped around her like a blanket against the night's chill. "Thank you," she whispered. He reached out then, his calloused fingers gently brushing a strand of hair from her face. The touch was fleeting, yet it lingered on her skin like a promise. "Good night, Josephine," he said quietly. "Good night, Gabriel," she replied, her voice steady despite the tumult within. As she prepared for bed in the spare room, Josephine's mind whirled with the day's events. Isabella's return, the threat to Gabriel's property, and most unsettling of all, the suggestion of marriage. A solution that should have seemed preposterous, but instead had planted a seed of possibility in her heart. Tomorrow, she would need to make a choice. Stay and fight alongside Gabriel, whatever form that might. Take or leave and remove herself as a weapon Blackwood could use against him. Neither option was without cost. Neither path guaranteed happiness or security, but for the first time since arriving in Arizona territory, Josephine Reed faced her uncertain future not with fear, but with a flickering flame of hope that refused to be extinguished. Morning arrived, with the soft golden light of early summer filtering through the curtains, gently drawing Josephine from restless sleep. She had spent much of the night turning over Isabella's startling suggestion in her mind, weighing possibilities against practicalities, examining her own heart with unflinching honesty. She dressed carefully in her original grey dress, now cleaned, and mended with her skilled hands. Today would require all her composure, whatever decisions were made. She pinned her hair simply but neatly, studying her reflection in the small mirror. The woman who gazed back at her seemed different from the hopeful bride who had stepped off the train just 1 week ago. Her eyes held a quiet confidence that had been missing before. When she emerged, she found Gabriel and Isabella already in deep conversation at the table, documents spread between them. They looked up as she entered, Isabella with calculating assessment, Gabriel with something warmer in his gaze. "I've been reviewing the legal claim," Isabella explained. "There might be a weakness we can exploit." "I thought the situation was dire," Josephine said, accepting the cup of coffee Gabriel offered her. "It is," Isabella admitted, "but I noticed Blackwood's witness is Taylor's father." "The deputy's father," Gabriel clarified. "Precisely. And Taylor. Senior has a history of perjury in Yuma County. Judge Henderson wouldn't know that, but I found the records in San Francisco." A tentative hope flickered in Gabriel's eyes. That could discredit his testimony. Their strategy session was interrupted by the sound of approaching riders. Many riders. Gabriel moved to the window, his expression darkening. Blackwood, with the deputy and several others. "The water inspection isn't until tomorrow," Isabella said, rising quickly. "This isn't about water," Gabriel replied grimly. "Stay inside, both of you. We're standing together," Josephine countered, moving to his side. After a moment's hesitation, Isabella joined them. The three stepped onto the porch as 7 men rode into the yard. Blackwood led them, smugness etched on his features. Beside him rode a distinguished gentleman in an expensive suit. Mitchell, the incoming judge, Josephine guessed. "Thornton," Blackwood called. "Brought Judge Mitchell to see the disputed property. At first hand, unannounced and uninvited." Gabriel replied coolly. How typical. Mitchell dismounted, eyeing the trio on the porch with undisguised curiosity. Mr. Thornton, Miss Reed. His gaze shifted to Isabella, widening in surprise. And Miss Thornton, I wasn't aware you had returned to the territory. Just yesterday, Your Honor, Isabella replied smoothly. Fascinating timing, wouldn't you say? A flicker of unease crossed Mitchell's face. Indeed, Blackwood's satisfaction faltered at seeing Isabella. An impromptu family reunion. How touching. What do you want, Blackwood? Gabriel demanded. Judge Mitchell wishes to inspect the water. Writes documentation before tomorrow's formal review. That's irregular, Isabella interjected. Almost as irregular as failing to disclose your previous business relationship with the judge, Mitchell frowned. Miss Thornton, I assure you— Save your assurances, she interrupted, unfolding a document from her pocket. I have copies of transactions between your bank and Blackwood Industries from St. Louis. Hardly an impartial position from which to rule. The atmosphere shifted perceptibly. Mitchell's face drained of color. Where did you get those? San Francisco courthouse records are remarkably comprehensive. Blackwood's confidence crumbled. This is outrageous. You can't intimidate a territorial— And judge, says the man who brought 7 armed riders to a private property inspection, Josephine countered, finding her voice. Your Honor, there's more at stake here than water rights. There's a pattern of intimidation and corruption that deserves investigation. For a long moment no one spoke. Then Mitchell cleared his throat. Perhaps this matter requires additional consideration before formal proceedings. You can't be serious, Blackwood sputtered. Mr. Blackwood, I suggest you withdraw your petition until these complications can be resolved. Blackwood's face contorted with rage. This isn't over, Thornton. Perhaps not, Gabriel replied evenly. But today it is. After the riders departed, the 3 returned inside, the victory bittersweet. This buys us time, Isabella cautioned, but Blackwood will find another angle. Then we'll face it together, Gabriel said, his gaze finding Josephine's. Later, as sunset painted the mountains in crimson and gold, Josephine stood on the porch, contemplating the land that had become precious to her in just 1 week. Gabriel joined her, his presence familiar and right. Isabella's leaving tomorrow, says she's done her part and the rest is up to us. And what is the rest? Josephine asked softly. That depends. He turned to face her. My offer wasn't just for a week, Josephine. This place needs you. I need you. The simple honesty of his words touched something deep within her. As your housekeeper? As my partner? My wife, if you'll have me. He took her hands in his. Not to outmaneuver Blackwood, not out of convenience, but because in 1 week you've brought more life to this ranch and to me than I thought possible. Yes, she answered, certainty filling her heart. Yes, Gabriel Thornton, I'll stay, not as your housekeeper but as your wife. His smile transformed his face, erasing the worry lines that had become so familiar. As the first stars appeared in the twilight sky, he sealed their promise with a kiss that spoke of respect, partnership, and the certainty of deeper love to come. Josephine Reed had arrived in Arizona territory with nothing but a carpetbag and desperate hope. 1 week later, she had found not just shelter but a home, not just security but purpose, not just a husband but a man who valued her for exactly who she was. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.